Hi, folks. Puffin here with an important and hot topic for today, March 6th, 2021. Racism and sexism in books and movies, and media in general, in art. Um, it's a hot topic today because the last couple days the news about Dr. Seuss books being canceled for racist images. I was going to make this video after I finished watching, after I finished reading the book, Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper, which is racist. It's completely racist throughout it and sexist. When it's not being racist, it's being sexist. And amidst all that, it's an adventurous, exciting story. It's also the first American novel, or he's considered the first American novelist. I believe it was published in 1826, and the story is supposed to take place in 1757. But I'm not going to review the book. I never was going to make a review of the book. I did want to discuss the racism and sexism in the book, or more appropriately, how we view that. And then, since I just finished it this morning and this news about Dr. Seuss is out, I wanted to talk about that and also mention a character from The Simpsons, Apu, and share my thoughts on these things. And before I do any of that, I want to say, as by way of a disclaimer or just up front, that I'm a privileged white person and I don't have the experience that makes me sensitive to the types of racism and stuff that are expressed in these things. I've tried to be sensitive all my life to these things, in racism and sexism and all sorts of things. Whenever I've experienced them growing up in the South in Georgia, there's lots of opportunities to be sensitive to those experiences, even if you're not the one that they're directed towards. I do believe that we're all oppressed by racism and sexism, even though many of us are privileged and aren't oppressed by it directly. It's an oppressive thing to be a part of. A system that's so full of that is oppressive to everyone, even if you're not the one that it's directed to. And it's something I have been trying to be sensitive to. I'm also someone who likes to express a lot of opinions. If you've seen my channel before, you'll know that's true. And as someone who expresses a lot of opinions, and I like to be right. I'm one of those people who likes to be right and be correct and think I'm really smart. But I also believe that that means that the smartest, most correct opinion is the one that is the most sensitive to the most people's concerns and the one that's in touch with the most people's understanding. So by saying that, I want to, hear if I want to be corrected if there's things that I'm failing to understand, if I'm wrong about. So I want to express my opinions so I can be corrected. I also found out just shortly after reading the book that Mark Twain, who happens to be my great granduncle, by full disclosure, he had actually written a critique of James Fenimore Cooper, his literary offenses, his offenses, or I think it's called James Fenimore Cooper's Literary Offenses. An essay about 26 pages just trashing him. And so I was excited to learn that. He wrote that and it came out in 1895. I was excited to learn that, to think, well, hey, at least people were critical of this guy's racism, even 50 years after he died, 70 years after the book was written, but people were critical of his racism. And I can't say that Mark Twain missed it, but I can't say that he hit it either, because all I know is I could only read the first, say, 6 pages of his essay. And at least in the first 6 pages, he wasn't addressing that as, a primary major issue or major concern right up front. So maybe it's in some more of the essay. It's further in the essay, and I didn't get to read that part. But I was disappointed that it wasn't right up front, because that's all I really want to talk about the book. I don't want to give examples or anything. I just really wanted to say that, yeah, it's racist on pretty much every page. It's sexist on every other page, just because it doesn't figure into the story as much to mention the women, but it's sexist whenever it does. And it's, he's considered the first great American novelist. Now, I don't know if Mark Twain is considered the second, but it is appropriate for him to have criticized him, and it seems like a good work. But as far as I could tell, it doesn't have the criticism of the racism in there, which was disappointing. But it makes me want to, as a white person, um, want to be someone who is criticizing the racism, who's and I do believe that it takes all of our voices talking about these things to help address the problem the best. And I figure if you're already watching the video, you might as well. But I do appreciate you watching. And the comparisons I wanted to make are just to say that no one's talking about canceling or not publishing The Last of the Mohicans. And I'm not advocating that they should. It's shocking to read this, to even expecting it, because I was expecting it going into the book. But it's shocking to read how, like, the nature of an extent and just ubiquitousness of the racism throughout the book, just always popping up, like I said, almost on every page. And it's so it's shocking, but it's like, does reading this book make me more racist and more sexist? Well, as a person who doesn't want to be those things, it certainly doesn't. It makes me upset by that part, and I feel like that's where having these things are a point, an opportunity for discussion or for understanding of attitudes and how attitudes have changed or can change. And I guess one more complicated thing about Dr. Seuss is, are you going to have these conversations with young kids reading these books? I am sad, as of someone who's enjoyed Dr. Seuss myself, I'm sad to think about really any books getting not being published, that aren't intentionally hateful. But any books not getting published, it makes me sad. But at the same time, I think, well, in that situation where something has been promoted so much and is part of American culture, the offensive things I almost wish could be taken out, could be changed, could be altered in some way, because they're not. And again, I don't even know 4 of the books, of the 6 books that they said they aren't going to publish. I'm not even aware of 4 of them. I've never read them. They don't ring a bell. They're not familiar to me. But I do know If I Ran the Zoo and the things that I saw on Mulberry Street. And I don't know them well enough. I haven't maybe read them in 10 years or so, but I don't know them well enough to know the offensive parts, except for maybe the depiction of the Chinese person. That one thing I know about, just from the reporting about this recently, is that Geisel, Dr. Seuss, had drawn offensive Japanese caricatures in as a cartoonist for a newspaper prior to doing the Dr. Seuss books, but that was his job to do so, and he felt bad about it, and he expressed remorse for having done that, and that it was said it was one of those things that came from his job to do. As a cartoonist, which meaning these other cartoonists were instructed to do the same things. It was part of that job at that time, and not to excuse it, but say it was part of this whole racist cultural system at that time. Because that's also a time that Americans put Japanese people in internment camps. So there was a whole lot of racism against Japanese people in World War II that extended to these editorial political cartoons in magazines and things, of which he was that type of artist. But the fact that he expressed regret for that, to me indicates that wouldn't be his intention to offend people, and even that he would approve of changing things when people realize that the things that maybe he didn't realize were offensive, things could be changed. I personally regret that a whole story can go away for a offensive image that could be changed, and it wouldn't hurt the story. Slash, it doesn't seem like it would be promoting something bad if it's not the person's intention. But again, this is where I feel free to stand corrected, because I'm not the person who's sensitive to these things as a recipient of racism. So it's like that's my opinion on it, and that's where again, trying to be sensitive to these things, I wanted to talk about it. And I wanted to talk about it from reading The Last of the Mohicans, to say that, this is celebrated as far as I know, still considered this great American novel. I read it in my DS copy. There's a book called, a great cartridge, a game, it's not really a game, but a game cartridge called 100 Classic Books, and it has 100 classic books on it. So I read it on, as you can see, Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. And it's really great to read it on this, because you can leave bookmarks, and it's just, you can read in the dark and all types of stuff. But it took me about a year to read it, because I lost this and didn't have it, I didn't have the cord for it or something like that. So basically, I'm kind of glad that it took me so long to read it, because when I finished reading it this morning, this news story is all over my Google feed and stuff, and so it seemed like a appropriate time to talk about it. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is, in general, canceling characters, books, cultures. The what people refer to whiningly as cancel culture, that I think there is a better word for it as consequence culture, when someone's done something wrong, which focuses on, hey, what are the consequences for somebody doing something wrong, not what can we cancel, what can we find something to cancel something about. And I don't think there's that much of that, really, other than kind of a swell in the internet, like the internet realizing its power to do that. And sometimes it's maybe trolls. So I wonder about Apu, Nahasapi from The Simpsons, who, as you can see on my shirt here, Apu was a major character on The Simpsons. As far as I can tell, they've phased him out of The Simpsons without a great fanfare. I think they did a little, letting they were letting him go type of thing during the episode about Lisa reading The Secret Garden. And it's got a great line where Lisa says, I hope my eye doesn't fall on something racist, when she opens up The Secret Garden and she looks and says something about the Hungarian. I don't know what, but it's not about the racist line, but it's about the fact that it is a racist line. And sure enough, wherever you look, there's going to be another one in works of this era that are, considered classics. And The Secret Garden's a great book. I love that. I love The Secret Garden. And when I read it, I don't remember the things standing out to me. So I feel like, well, I'm obviously not as sensitive to these things as I imagine I am. But at the same time, I've watched all the episodes of The Simpsons. I've loved The Simpsons my entire life. And I've always loved Apu. And I've never thought of anything that Apu said. Apu was always a positive character. As you see here on my shirt, like Ned Flanders, behind Marge and Homer, the most famous, prominent Simpsons there are, besides the kids. You've got Ned Flanders, who's one of the most beloved characters on The Simpsons, or just in the world in general. You've got Monty Burns. These are all of the same status, in prominence on the shirt anyway. Monty Burns, who is loved and hated, again, one of the most famous Simpsons characters, and Apu. And he's just as big, or in the same row as Ned Flanders and Monty Burns. Like a very important and positive character. He's never been presented negatively in my mind. But maybe I'm not sensitive to the ways that he could be presented negatively. Then you've got behind them Krusty and Barney and Grandpa. But all of whom are also, important characters. But it's almost, like an Egyptian relief that, the prominence of the character shows how important they are. And it shows that Apu was an important and respected character. Now, problematic character, because he's voiced by a non-Indian actor doing a character of an Indian voice, which is a racist thing to do, that was far more accepted when The Simpsons started and the character started, because The Simpsons has been running for 30 years. And kind of the one consequence of the success of The Simpsons continuing on, through generations, is that when people are more sensitive and there's a more cultural responsibility to hire people to play, the role that of the character, that have some of the background of that character, to give people more representation in work as much as for authenticity, I think. But it's just part of being, doing everything you can, and to give, but it is for authenticity as well. And it's something that I feel like, well, could you have hired someone to voice Apu, and you wouldn't have to ask them to voice Apu in a character voice. I don't think people would be upset if Apu's voice changed, and you got to continue on as a character. I just don't see anything that was negative about Apu, and particularly, I feel like this particular example, and I could be wrong, and there could be some other examples, but I don't think there's examples are as numerous as the internet pretends. The internet, or the right wing on the internet, likes to whine. They're like the Olympic gold medalists of whining, and they complain that people are going after this and cancel culture and cancel this and cancel that. I sound like I'm complaining about that in terms of Apu, and it could be because I'm such a fan of The Simpsons that I'm blinded to things. I'm such a fan of Apu that I'm blinded to things that make him an even more problematic character. But my idea is that if you were to change the actor so that someone else could play Apu, and not, and if they wanted to do this, that's a characteristic, a caricature voice. It kind of made me think about it, like, if it is customary to have people play the roles, these days the idea is to have people play the roles. Now, I even noticed in the About the Book feature of the DS game that the most recent movie adaptation, because apparently there are a lot, of The Last of the Mohicans, was 1992, and Daniel Day-Lewis was The Last of the Mohicans, and I don't know, his background, or if that would be acceptable today, or if they should recast it, or if you should not do it again because there's so much racism, just all these different conflicting issues. And that was 30 years ago now, almost, that movie was made. Now, maybe there's been another one since then, I'm not entirely sure, but that seems about right. I remember it being a successful movie at the time. The thing is, with like a comedian doing a caricature voice, if they're doing a character of their parents or their grandparents, and that is a funny voice, even the idea that only someone with that family relation should we accept to use that humor, it's not like you would be losing that much humor by people, other people not doing caricature accents. On the other hand, the accents are funny, and it's kind of up to in my opinion, it's kind of up to the spirit of the joke. If you're mocking someone, or if you're imitating someone. And mocking someone, trying to denigrate someone is bad. But again, it comes down to thinking that Apu was presented badly or well. I always thought he was presented well. And I read what I think was, the primary article for calling out Apu, or calling out The Simpsons to remove Apu. And it just didn't sit as genuine to me. It seemed like the person was making things up. They were blaming The Simpsons for associating Indian, or I believe Apu is Indian, with like convenience store work. And first of all, there's nothing wrong with convenience store work. You don't have to take that as an insult. But secondly, it didn't originate with The Simpsons, but the author of the article was certainly implying that it was. And just being aware of 80s television, or, just, it didn't come from The Simpsons. It's a stereotype that had been promoted by, plenty of media outlets prior to The Simpsons, and was something that people experienced in life that, I remember when Trump took office, there was something about 7-Eleven turning in, all these different people to immigration, to ICE, because they were dissatisfied with them as managers of their restaurant, of their convenience stores. But just to suggest that there's that many hundreds of people, from certain countries that run convenience stores as part of the business of the the company that owns the convenience store, and that's just probably the way it's been for some time. Not exclusively, obviously, but to the point that people have included it in their jokes and stuff about uh, throughout the 80s, and if they've stopped making those types of jokes, or if they weren't. I mean, I think honestly, a lot of them were in the 80s when people were more comfortable with mean-spirited jokes like that. A lot of them were mean-spirited. I just don't think that The Simpsons having Apu work in a convenience store was ever a mean-spirited type of thing, or it was ever supposed to be a denigrating thing. But I can understand how when people are teased by people who are being mean-spirited and using Apu catchphrases or something to tease somebody, that's a rude thing to do. I think that was something that was mentioned in the article that I have to be, admit that I'm not aware of. So if that's going on, I would be insensitive not to include it or mention it. But again, I feel like that Apu was a positive character, that there wasn't a bad intention, that if you replace the voice actor giving an Indian actor work, and left it up to them, the voice and accent they used, it's kind of like, do we have to be offended if we're not really offended? And that's one thing about the Dr. Seuss story, that I had to click on an article about woke millennial parents, and how they feel about Dr. Seuss. And they really only had two examples of two different women. One who just, I guess, happened to, it's supposed to be a good example, that she had decided to decorate her child's nursery or child's bedroom in Dr. Seuss things, and then finds out later that it's problematic, or it's not that sensitive of it herself, or she wouldn't have wanted to do that in the first place, obviously. But it spent $200 on the decorations, and decides maybe to leave them and to talk about the issues, which again I feel like is one way to address it, to talk about these things when they come up, or when they when they exist in the book you're reading. And then the other one was somebody, an educator, trying to tell her educator mom or relative that they should also not teach Dr. Seuss or something like that. It seems like some of that is this manufactured outrage over Dr. Seuss. Not that people aren't upset over a legitimate thing, but that getting the person who bought Dr. Seuss stuff to admit that it's not a big enough deal to want to remove it, or it's not like you're going to have the merchandise of the racist images. You're going to have the acceptable and positive images that everyone's really enjoyed for a long time. And it's just one of those things where not that there's not a concern or a reason to do something about it, but what they've done, blocking the books, first caused people to rush to go buy the books, things like this. Also, it's drove up all the prices on eBay, this type of thing, made them collectibles or whatever. Also, it's given these right-wing people this war on Christmas kind of thing to whine about, and just a rallying cry to their whine, that they can therefore appeal to just everybody who ever liked Dr. Seuss. All these people that don't have these opinions about stuff, but because they like Dr. Seuss, they start listening to these people. And it's just like, just don't give them that power. Don't give them that complaint. But my real point, the real message I wanted to put in all of this video, is to say that to be dealing with these things is good. To be having these conversations is good, however we end up dealing with them. Because you can always decide to publish the books again, or to publish them with alterations, as I was recommending, something like that. And apparently they've altered them somewhat before, because they've changed some details about it. But talking about these things is good, but these books affect people when they read them. And most people aren't going to read The Last of the Mohicans. Like, am I the last person who's going to read The Last of the Mohicans? Just because, as popular as it has been throughout our history, I don't know that it's all that popular. Maybe it's still being assigned in schools and stuff. And you hope that if they do assign it in schools, they would give some people kind of some primer, some type of like, I know that like Mark Twain is assigned in schools, which I appreciate. I love Mark Twain. And it's been debated. It's been banned in lots of schools. But I do wish that when they assigned it, they gave some context and say, hey, this has this language in it that's offensive and demeaning, and we're not endorsing that language by assigning this book, and we don't want you to be shocked by it when you come and count. Just some type of preparation. And I would hope that if they are assigning Last of the Mohicans, they're giving lots of preparation, because there's a whole lot of stuff in there that's, just it's icky, racism and sexism. And the thing about something being banned is it drives up that imaginative appeal or allure in some ways. That taboo makes things attractive in some ways. So that's kind of dangerous as well, which is one reason why people could say legalize recreational drugs and things, because having them be taboo increases the appeal, instead of it just being something some people choose to do. Then that's something I had an experience of as a real young child. But yeah, before I get into that, I do want to share that story. But I just want to say that these things affect people when they read the books. And real racism that's in the real world affects people all the time. And until we actually deal with that, it's not like we don't have time to deal with these other things. We should deal with everything we can. We can do it on all different fronts. But it seems hypocritical to act like you're accomplishing something by changing this book when you're not addressing like real hardcore racism and like the police killing people and all this stuff that's just going on every day. And all these people are trying to address it. So, maybe even make a special edition of these books saying this is the last time we're going to print these books as is, so all you people can buy it, but we're going to donate all that money to various, because it's not just black people who've been offended in some of these portrayals in the Dr. Seuss books. Give that money to these different organizations to help fight racism and help these communities. Take the money from these people who want to buy the last edition of they didn't have any problem printing it all these other years. So print it one more year, but take all that money and give it to these organizations. Just something like that. Something more creative is what I think Dr. Seuss would want you to do. So my whole point is to be addressing real life racism that affects everybody all the time, before patting yourself on the back too much about addressing racism in a book that only affects people when they read it. Now, back to the book that affects people when they read it. And this is just a story that's really affected me throughout my whole life. It's given me such a very clear memory. And it's a book I've never read, and a book I'll probably never read. But I heard about it when I was a kid. And it's a book that's probably offensive for me to even say the title of the book, so I apologize. But just to let you know what I'm talking about, there's a book called Little Black Sambo, or a series of books that like I said, I'd never read, but I'd heard something about them when I was in maybe third grade, and heard something maybe about how that was an offensive book that people used to read, but now they didn't make anymore. And I think something about the idea, or maybe I'd even seen an image, but I certainly had never seen a copy of the book. And so, maybe there was some news story that had something about, that had included the image. But anyway, so it could come up in my life somehow, and I maybe asked my parents about it, or maybe it was on the news or something about how it wasn't published anymore. And this would have been the early 80s, so they maybe had published it up until that time. And maybe that was what the news story was, is they weren't going to publish it anymore. But I think it would probably have been, banned or not published from long before that. But anyway, the dream that I had one night was that I was reading this book. It is a picture book, with pictures and words on each page. And I'm reading it, and I don't remember anything about what I'm reading. So I remember having the character that I'd still, because I've never seen the actual book, still associate with this character, but I didn't know. But I still don't really know if that's what he really looks like. Uh, but again, I don't know anything about what I was reading in the story. But what was very interesting to me in the dream, and this is how I'll end this, just because I think it mystically has something to do with all of this discussion, is in the dream, I'm reading this book, and I think the reason I had a dream about it is because I heard it was taboo, and so it stuck out in my mind. There's a book that you can't find, that you can't read. And so in my dream, I wanted to read it and was reading it. And I think I realized in my dream, I'm reading a book that I'm not supposed to be able to have, that's not supposed to exist. And I think maybe I realized I was in a dream at that time. And so all the time, whether you're awake or in a dream, if you ask yourself, am I in a dream? It'll help you when you are in a dream. Ask yourself if you're in a dream. And then you have more awareness within your dream, and different things can become possible in the dream. At this time, this is one of the only times this has happened to me in a dream. When I realize I'm reading a book in my dream, I think that's pretty amazing. And I wonder to myself and ask myself, if I'm reading this book in a dream, I must be writing this book in a dream. I must be writing this book that I'm reading. My mind must be writing it, because I realized I was in a dream. And so I'm reading along, and I see the words, and I see that there's words on the other page, and I get to them and read those words. But I think, but if I'm making this up, and so I flip ahead. I flip a few pages ahead. And as I'm flipping ahead, I see the words spill like rain from just nowhere, a little above the page, and puddle up into lines just flowing onto the page. And it was amazing and beautiful. And just one of those experiences, like I said, I'll never forget. And the reason I think it's a mystical lesson for us now is that when stories are lost or stories aren't told, we miss them, or we want stories. We always want more stories anyway. We want new stories too. And we are the ones who write the stories. We are the storytellers. We are the dreamers of the dreams, as they say in the Aphex Twin song that samples it from the Willy Wonka movie, the original one, and with Gene Wilder. We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of the dreams. We are the storytellers too. And that dream about I'm writing the story that I'm reading, it's like, well, you can rewrite a story too. And if I was to rewrite Last of the Mohicans without all the racism and sexism, it would maybe change a lot of it, but it wouldn't change the action. It wouldn't change the adventure. It wouldn't change and maybe somebody else could do that, could write that and do it